Hey secret seekers, welcome to the quest for secrets. I'm thrilled you're here as we dive into hidden mysteries, untold stories, and the secrets that shape our world. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below and let's connect across the globe. Chapter 1, The Opening Night. A crisp October breeze danced through the narrow streets of Cabot Cove, rustling golden maple leaves and sending a shiver through the handful of late arrivals hurrying toward the freshly restored library. Jessica Fletcher stepped from her car onto the brick walkway, her woolen coat snug around her shoulders and her sensible boots clicking on the damp stones. The scent of wood polish and old paper wafted from the building, mingling with the faint, sweet aroma of spiced cider offered at a small refreshment table by the entrance. Lanterns, strings of warm, amber bulbs, were draped along the eaves, casting a soft glow against the fading twilight sky. The library's facade gleamed in the early evening light, newly painted cream siding, dark oak trim, and a polished brass plaque proclaiming, Cabot Cove Public Library, reopened 2025. A cluster of neighbors gathered on the front steps, greeting one another with hugs and hearty handshakes. Behind them, through the tall arched windows, rows of towering bookshelves beckoned like ancient sentinels guarding a treasure trove of stories. Jessica paused to admire the handiwork of local carpenters and volunteers who had poured months of effort into restoring the century-old structure. She could almost hear the whispers of every reader who had once thumbed through these very pages. Inside, the luminous chandelier overhead revealed a crowd of perhaps 50 townsfolk, milling about beneath banners that read, "Welcome back," and "Thank you for preserving our heritage." Tables were laden with platters of finger sandwiches, crystal bowls of fresh fruit, and platters of sugar-glazed cookies shaped like tiny keys and books. A gentle hum of conversation filled the vaulted room, punctuated by laughter and the occasional chime of fine crystal as toasts were proposed. Jessica wove her way through clusters of well-wishers, past Mrs. Thompson, the retired postmistress, Mr. Delgado, the school principal, and young Ellie Farrow, whose bright eyes danced with excitement over the promise of new reading material. At the far end of the hall stood Mrs. Harriet Harper, the town's beloved librarian, her silver hair swept back in an elegant chignon. She wore a deep teal cardigan over a simple blouse and a string of pearls that caught the light as she moved. Despite her age, her posture remained regal, her eyes alight with pride. Jessica approached, offering a warm smile. "Harriet, the library looks magnificent. You must be thrilled." Harriet returned the smile, though a flicker of fatigue passed across her face. "I am, dear Jessica. More than you know. This library has been my life's work. To see it shine again," her hand rested tenderly on a nearby tome, "fills my heart." Yet even as she spoke, Jessica noted the slight tremor in Harriet's fingers, and the shadow of worry in her pale blue eyes. Before the two friends could exchange more pleasantries, the mayor's gavel sounded against a small wooden block at the speaker's podium. Mayor Owen Alden, tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, stepped forward to enthusiastic applause. He cleared his throat and began a well-rehearsed speech about community spirit, fiscal responsibility, and the importance of literacy. Jessica watched him closely. His tie was impeccably knotted, his cuffs crisp, yet there was an undercurrent of tension in the set of his jaw. When he spoke of the fundraising challenges that had threatened the project weeks earlier, she caught a fleeting look of relief pass across his face, as though this moment were the culmination of both triumph and relief. Just as Mayor Alden concluded with thanks to the countless volunteers, the hush that followed felt pregnant with anticipation. Mr. George Whitman, the town's historical archivist, unveiled a glass case containing a newly discovered 18th-century map of the region. With a dramatic flourish, he lifted the cover, revealing the delicate parchment illuminated by spotlights above. A collective gasp rose from the audience as they leaned forward to admire its intricate coastline and faded annotations in elegant script. Then, out of nowhere, a blood-curdling scream shattered the celebratory mood. It echoed from the back corner of the room, where the tall, dust-covered stacks of books had been cordoned off for the occasion. Silence fell like a heavy curtain, and Jessica's pulse quickened. She exchanged a glance with Harriet, whose face had gone ashen. Jessica moved swiftly toward the source, her writer's curiosity morphing instantly into detective's instinct. The crowd parted respectfully as she ducked under a velvet rope and stepped between the towering shelves. A scene of horror awaited. Mrs. Harper lay sprawled against a low table, her cardigan splayed open, Lifetime medals and reading glasses scattered on the floor. One hand clutched a worn leather journal, its cover creased and stained. The other arm was draped limply over a stack of ancient folios. Jessica knelt beside her friend, careful not to disturb the fragile journal. She felt for a pulse, only to find stillness. Somewhere in the recesses of her analytical mind, she catalogued the scene, the angle of Mrs. Harper's body, the way a single page of the journal protruded, the faint patter of footsteps retreating deeper into the shelves. A chill crawled up Jessica's spine as she recognized the gravity of the moment. The library's reopening gala had become the site of the town's first murder in decades. Gently, Jessica closed the journal, slid it into a protective envelope borrowed from Mrs. Whitman's archival supplies, and rose to her feet. She raised a calm hand. "Everyone, please remain where you are," she called, her voice steady yet commanding attention. "We have a grave situation here. No one must leave until the authorities arrive." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Jessica's demeanor reassured them that she would see this through. As the first echoes of the siren drifted in from the distance, Jessica cast a final glance at the dusty stacks, now silent witnesses to a terrible betrayal. The journal in her coat pocket felt impossibly heavy, packed with secrets that might explain why the beloved librarian had paid the ultimate price. In that suspended moment, amidst the hushed gasps and flickering lantern light, Jessica Fletcher understood that Cabot Cove's quaint calm was forever altered. And she, armed only with her sharp mind and unyielding resolve, would unearth the hidden truths lurking within those shadowed shelves. Chapter 2. The journal's first clue. The village inn was quiet by the time Jessica Fletcher returned, its common room dimly lit by the dying embers of a crackling hearth. She carried the sealed archival envelope containing Mrs. Harper's journal with the same reverence one would afford a fragile antique, aware that within its pages lay the only tangible witness to the librarian's last thoughts. The firelight danced across the polished oak desk in her snug second-floor study, illuminating stacks of her own manuscripts, leather-bound reference volumes, and her favorite brass magnifying glass. Here, amid the scent of burning pine and well-worn parchment, Jessica felt most at home, and most prepared for the work ahead. Removing the journal from its protective sleeve, she noted how the faded leather cover bore the imprints of time, the corners frayed, the spine creased from countless openings, and tiny flecks of dust clinging to the edges. Gently, she opened to the bookmarked page, page 137, where one line of script, penned in hurried strokes, stood out in stark relief. "Midnight shadows guard what's lost." Jessica's pulse quickened. What had haunted Mrs. Harper in her final hours? What secret treasure, or long-buried misdeed, had driven her to clutch this book to her dying breath? Under the reading lamp, she leaned closer, spotting a dark smear of ink at the margin, as though the writer's hand had slipped in haste. The smudge trailed into a faint arrow, crudely drawn, pointing toward the bottom corner of the page. There, in tiny, almost invisible script, was a single word, archway. Fanning out her notes across the desk, a hand-scrawled map of the library, witness statements, and a list of the evening's guests, Jessica realized that archway could only refer to the stone entrance of the old West Wing, sealed off for decades. She recalled Mrs. Harper mentioning that wing in passing, her eyes misting over at the memory of her late husband studying rare manuscripts there. Had something been hidden behind that stone arch? And why would the librarian, on the verge of retirement, feel compelled to investigate it again? A sudden knock at the door drew Jessica back to the present. The innkeeper, Mr. Caldwell, peeked in with a tray of hot tea and biscuits. "I made these for you, Miss Fletcher. You've been up late." His kindly eyes took in the open journal and her pensive expression. Jessica offered a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I may be here a while." After he left, she poured the steaming Earl Grey into a delicate china cup, its fragrant steam mingling with the smoky hearth. The warmth seeped into her hands as she refocused on the journal. Turning the page, she examined the preceding entries for context. Most were mundane annotations, acquisition logs, notes on donated volumes, and reminders to catalogue the new 18th century almanac. But these final entries marked a stark departure, a hastily drawn circle around the date, July 29, 2025, followed by a brief note. Met at archway. Bring lantern. Jessica's mind raced. The date was 2 nights ago, the same night Mrs. Harper had inspected the newly discovered map with Mr. Whitman, and presumably, the same night she met someone in secret. The instruction to bring lantern implied a clandestine rendezvous after hours. Perhaps the journal's author had intended to recover an item thought lost, or expose a truth. Now, however, that page lay stained with what Jessica hoped was only ink, not blood. With deliberate care, she lifted the magnifying glass and studied the tiny smudges around the circle. Under high magnification, she discovered a faint fingerprint, archived not in any official report, a partial whirl smeared into the ink. Jessica gently traced its dusty ridges, imagining the librarian's trembling fingers as she penned her last entry. Could the print belong to the person she was supposed to meet? And would that person be at the archway tonight? She gathered her tools, a small flashlight, gloves, her notebook, and a map of the library's floor plan. Before leaving her study, she paused at the window, where the moon cast silver beams across the inn's lawn. The night air carried the distant call of an owl and the rustle of leaves skittering along the cobblestones. Even at this late hour, Cabot Cove felt alive with unseen stirrings, whispers in shadow and secrets buried beneath centuries of tradition. Rising, Jessica tucked the journal into the inner pocket of her coat, securing it with a practiced fold. She poured the last of her tea down the sink and folded her arms around her slender frame, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The archway in question was in the oldest part of the library, accessible only through a narrow service corridor behind the stacks. She would need to slip in before midnight, search the sealed western wing, and find whatever Mrs. Harper had hidden or discovered. At the head of the stairs, Jessica paused once more, allowing her gaze to linger on the fire's dying glow. A single ember glinted like a distant star, reminding her that even the smallest spark could illuminate the darkest mystery. She left a note for Mr. Caldwell, brief, courteous, instructing him not to disturb her, and descended into the night. Outside, the inn's lantern swung in the breeze as Jessica approached her parked sedan. The chill air nipped at her cheeks, sharpening her senses. She clicked on her flashlight and headed toward the library, footsteps muffled by the carpet of fallen leaves. The journal's cryptic line echoed in her mind, "Midnight shadows guard what's lost." Tonight, she would confront those shadows, and uncover the truth that had cost Mrs. Harper her life. The night was silent but for Jessica's steady breath and the whisper of her coat against the wind. With determination as her compass and curiosity as her guide, she set off to retrace the final steps of a woman who had devoted her life to the pursuit of knowledge, a woman who, in her last act, had entrusted Jessica Fletcher to solve the greatest puzzle of all. Chapter 3: The Mayor's Ambition. Jessica Fletcher stood in the marble-floored lobby of Cabot Cove Town Hall, her sensible heels clicking against the polished stone as she waited for Mayor Owen Alden to receive her. Afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across framed photographs of town milestones and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. The faint scent of polished mahogany mingled with the tang of fresh ink from official documents scattered atop the reception desk. All around her, the rhythm of local government hummed quietly, the soft murmur of clerks answering phones, the distant thud of rubber stamps, the occasional ring of a typewriter key. Yet in that hushed bustle, Jessica felt the unmistakable pull of something unresolved, an unsettled piece of this mystery that beckoned her closer. A door marked, Mayor's Office, swung open, and a young aide ushered Jessica into a richly appointed room paneled in dark oak. Bookshelves lined one wall, heavy volumes of town records and historical monographs filling the shelves. A large oil painting of Cabot Cove's founder, Governor Adrian Cabot, gazed down from above. The mayor's desk, also oak, was meticulously organized, a neat stack of correspondence on one side, polished nameplate that read, Owen Alden, and an empty cup still faintly redolent of the morning's coffee. Behind it sat Mayor Alden himself, tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed in a navy suit that bespoke both authority and diligence. Jessica, he greeted warmly, rising to shake her hand. His grip was firm but not overbearing, and his smile genuine. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Jessica gave him a courteous nod and settled into a high-backed leather chair. She observed the small details, the slight crease in his tailored trousers, the gold cufflinks shaped like tiny quill pens, the family portrait on his desk showing Alden with a wife and 2 young children. Everything hinted at a man who cared deeply for his public role and his private life, yet Jessica knew how easily ambition could eclipse loyalty. "Mayor Alden," she began smoothly, placing her notebook on her lap, "I appreciate you taking time to speak with me. I know this must be difficult, especially given your close friendship with Mrs. Harper." A flash of sorrow crossed his eyes, and he bowed his head for a moment. Harriet was more than our librarian. She was the heart of Cabot Cove, always ready with a story, a smile, or an earnest piece of advice. It's unthinkable that anyone would harm her. Jessica nodded, pen poised. "I understand. Could you tell me about the library's funding situation prior to the reopening? I've heard there were budgetary challenges." The mayor sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, there were concerns. The library renovation project almost stalled when a major donor pulled out at the last minute. We scrambled to replace those funds. It was stressful." She allowed a beat before asking, "Do you know why the donor withdrew? Was anything amiss?" Alden's expression tightened. "Not entirely. The donor cited personal financial reversals, though some rumors suggested dissatisfaction with our spending plan. It was unfortunate timing, right when Harriet needed those funds to finalize the restoration." Jessica made a note. "And the missing donation check," she pressed gently. "I understand a check for $5,000 sent by the town council never arrived." At this, Alden's brow furrowed. His left hand tapped a staccato rhythm on the desk. That's correct. The check was authorized by the council, signed by me and the treasurer. It should have been delivered to the library's office. Instead, it vanished. We conducted an internal inquiry, but found no clear answer." She leaned forward. "Have you considered that someone close to Harriet might have intercepted it? Or perhaps someone in town hall?" The mayor's gaze flickered toward the closed drawer of his desk. For a moment, Jessica glimpsed hesitation, an almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He recovered quickly. "I suppose it's possible." But no evidence pointed to internal foul play. If anything, it all seemed a matter of clerical error. Jessica watched him closely, noting beads of perspiration forming at his temples. "Clerical error rarely applies to a missing check of that size," she observed quietly. "Especially when it jeopardizes an important community project." Alden ran his fingers through his silver hair. "I assure you, none of us, wanted this to happen. But the check never showed up, and we had to divert emergency town funds to finish the work." She pressed on. "Did you personally deliver the check, or was it sent via mail?" "I signed it," he said, voice taut, "and handed it to the town clerk, Mrs. Whitmore. She was to take it directly to the library. It's her responsibility now, but she, like me, is grieving Harriet's passing." Jessica allowed her gaze to drift around the office once more, the thick curtains drawn against the afternoon glare, the family Bible open on a side table, the faint outline of a ledger book peeking from the mayor's briefcase. Everything looked in order, too orderly, as if arranged to ward off suspicion. She closed her notebook and looked back at him. "Mayor Alden, I'd like to see the town clerk's records, delivery logs, outgoing mail receipts for that week. Would you permit that?" He hesitated, glancing away as though calculating potential fallout. Then he nodded, shoulders relaxing. "Of course. You have my full cooperation. Thank you for pursuing every lead, Jessica. Harriet would expect nothing less." She offered him a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mayor. I'll be discreet, but thorough." Rising, she tucked her notebook into her coat pocket and extended her hand once more. "I know how much you valued Mrs. Harper. I intend to find her killer, and restore your community's peace." As she turned to leave, Jessica paused briefly at the doorway, taking one last look at his office. Mayor Alden returned to his desk, fingers brushing the missing ledger book as though remembering its absence. In that silent moment, Jessica filed away not only the facts he had shared but the nervous glance toward the drawer and the careful way his papers were arranged. Every detail might prove crucial. Stepping back into the corridor, she inhaled deeply. The hum of town hall resumed around her, but her mind was already racing toward the clerk's office and the missing check. Somewhere between the oak panels and the faded wallpaper lay a clue, perhaps a signature on a mail log, a misplaced envelope, or a hidden resentment. One thing was certain, Mayor Alden's ambition had steered this project through stormy waters, and now it might have steered someone toward murder. And Jessica Fletcher would uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Chapter 4: The Niece's Arrival. A salty breeze carried the tang of seaweed as Jessica Fletcher climbed the narrow path to the weather-worn cottage perched on a rocky bluff overlooking the harbor. Driftwood and bleached shells littered the front yard, and wind-bent grasses whispered against whitewashed siding. Above the low-pitched roof, gulls wheeled in spirals, crying their plaintive cries. Jessica paused at the chipped wooden door, steeling herself for the questions ahead, knowing that every answer Emily Harper offered carried both promise and peril. Inside, the cottage felt cramped yet inviting, oak beams darkened with age, a knotty pine floor strewn with braided rag rugs, and shelves crowded with maritime trinkets, model schooners, scrimshawed whale teeth, and battered logbooks. A peppermint-scented candle flickered on a small table beside a wicker chair, where a half-finished embroidery lay abandoned. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, illuminating a brass lantern that hung from a rusty hook, its glass panes streaked with salt spray. Jessica felt the hush of untold stories pressing against the walls. She found Emily Harper in the kitchen, her slender frame folded into a chair by a window overlooking the churning grey sea. Emily's dark curls framed a pale, weary face, her green eyes, mirroring storm clouds, flicked up as Jessica entered. When she spoke, her voice quivered with equal parts grief and defiance. Aunt Harriet wouldn't hurt a fly, but she kept secrets, Emily said, twisting a teacup handle. Please understand, I never wanted this to happen. Jessica settled across from her, offering a sympathetic nod. I know how close you were, she said softly. But I need your help piecing together Harriet's final days. Any detail might matter. Emily inhaled sharply, reaching inside her cardigan to withdraw a small, folded fragment of parchment. The paper's edges were torn jaggedly, and a section of what appeared to be a hand-drawn map showed a winding corridor and the word, vault, in faded ink. My aunt argued with me the night before she died, Emily confessed, smoothing the fragment on the table. I wanted to sell some family heirlooms to help her pay for the renovation. She refused, said the artifacts belonged to Cabot Cove's history, not my inheritance. We argued outside the West Wing archway. She slammed the door and left without a word. Her voice cracked as she remembered the heat of that confrontation. Jessica unfolded her notebook and sketched the map fragment's jagged contours. This might correspond to the library's sealed basement corridor, she remarked, tracing the corridor's angles with her fingertip. It seems deliberate. Harriet circled this route before meeting someone. The fragment's uneven tiers suggested haste, as though the writer had ripped it from a larger plan. Jessica's brow creased. Whoever held this map might know more than they admitted. Emily's fingers trembled as she handed over a photograph torn from her aunt's personal scrapbook, a grainy black and white shot of the library's west entrance, the archway partially obscured by climbing ivy. Someone had scrawled a red X on the arch in pencil. I found this under her desk, Emily whispered. She was going to show it to me, but I don't know why. Her lips pressed into a thin line, guilt flickered across her expression. Jessica studied the photograph in the fading light, noting the ivy's direction and the archway's distinctive masonry. It looks like Harriet discovered a hidden latch behind the stones, she said. That X could mark a secret door. Did she ever mention a vault or storage room? Emily shook her head, tears brimming. She only spoke of preserving history. But I overheard her whisper about recovering what was lost, something she'd hidden decades ago. A sudden crash from the other room made Emily startle, and Jessica rose calmly. Stay here, she instructed, stepping into the narrow hallway where a bookshelf had toppled, sending a scattering of nautical charts across the floor. Jessica gathered the charts, noting one titled, Smuggler's Cove, 1824. Beneath it lay a weathered ledger book, its cover stamped with a faded crest. She slipped on gloves and opened the ledger to find names and dates that corresponded to auctions held in the old West Wing. Returning to Emily, she placed the ledger next to the map fragment. These items might not belong to your family alone, she observed. Harriet might have been recovering artifacts taken from townspeople over generations. Emily's eyes widened. You think she was trying to return something, and someone stopped her? Jessica nodded. It appears she arranged that meeting at midnight to hand over proof. But whatever she found threatened someone powerful enough to kill. Emily rose, her resolve strengthening. I want to help, she said. Aunt Harriet trusted you. I'll show you where she kept her research. She led Jessica down a steep stairwell to a cramped study under the cottage, shelves lined with ring binders and loose manuscripts, all catalogued in Harriet's precise handwriting. A brass key hung on a hook labeled, West Wing Archive. Emily handed it over with shaking hands. Jessica pocketed the key and examined the labeled binders, maritime salvage, local antiquities, and family collections. The binder tab marked Harper Heirlooms bore a fresh indentation, as though recently thumbed through. Jessica's mind raced. The heirloom argument was more than personal, it was a clue. Aunt and niece had clashed over ownership, but the true motive lay buried in these files. Stepping back into the fading daylight, Emily's sea-scented tears glistened. "I'm sorry I argued," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this." Jessica placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Your honesty will help bring justice," she said. "Harriet's work won't be lost." As they emerged onto the windswept bluff, Jessica scanned the horizon. The library's silhouette perched beyond the harbor's mouth, its archway awaiting discovery. With the map fragment, the ledger, and Emily's testimony, her path forward had never been clearer. Chapter 5, Footprints in the Fog. The moon broke through drifting clouds as Jessica Fletcher stepped out of the library's rear entrance, the cool night air carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. She clicked her flashlight on, its narrow beam slicing through the mist that curled around the brick walls like silent sentinels. Behind her, the hush of Cabot Cove was broken only by distant church bells chiming midnight and the occasional rustle of rats in the overgrown ivy. Jessica crouched beside a shallow puddle reflecting the library's side door. There, in the mud at the edge of the stone path, she spotted the first clue, a single, deep footprint, boot heel pressed firmly into the soft ground. She traced its outline with gloved fingers. The tread was unfamiliar, a pattern of interlocking diamonds and a tiny anchor motif. Someone had come or gone here in haste. Following the footprints, Jessica ventured into the fog-shrouded courtyard. Lanterns on the far wall flickered weakly, their light struggling against the veil of moisture. More prints emerged, sloping toward a narrow service alley. She paused to snap a photo with her phone, evidence for the coroner, before pressing on. As she rounded the corner, a low stone arch beckoned, guarding a set of barred basement windows half hidden by tangled rhododendron bushes. Jessica clicked off her phone and approached the windows. The glass panes were dusty, but one had been slightly ajar. She pried it open with a gloved hand and shone her light inside. The beam revealed a cramped storage room, metal shelving lined with cardboard boxes, a stray pile of catalogued folios, and, inexplicably, a lone lantern perched on a crate. It was the very type of lantern Mrs. Harper had mentioned in her journal entry, "Bring lantern." She peered through the bars into the dim interior and scanned the floor. There, on a slate tile beside the lowest shelf, lay an ink-stained handkerchief. Jessica retrieved it carefully, noting the coarse cotton fabric and the monogram embroidered in looping script, CW. The corners were smeared with dark blotches, perhaps ink, perhaps something darker. She slid the handkerchief into a clean evidence bag and turned her focus back to the footprints. They continued past the window, receding into the fog toward the old carriage house at the edge of the property. Jessica followed, boots crunching on gravel. There, a half-buried cobblestone trapdoor offered silent testimony of long-forgotten cellars. She knelt to inspect it, rusted hinges, a heavy iron ring handle, and deep scratches along one edge, as if someone had pried it open with a crowbar. She scrawled a note in her pocket journal, trapdoor, rusted hinges, possible entry. A sudden sound made her freeze, a soft click, almost imperceptible, coming from behind the carriage house. Jessica pressed her back against the damp wall, flashlight held aloft. She caught the glint of metal, the shape of a key turning in a lock. The trapdoor creaked as it shifted. Heart pounding, she edged closer, her mind calculating every possibility. If someone else was here, they could destroy evidence, or worse. With the trapdoor partially open, cool air from below drifted upward, carrying a musty, subterranean odor. Jessica shone her light down the dark shaft. A narrow ladder rungs descended into shadowed depths. She drew in a steadying breath. Beneath the trapdoor lay the library's hidden sub-basement, unmapped by most, known only to a few long-time staff. Tonight, it had become ground zero for a sinister rendezvous. She slipped the trapdoor fully open and peered inside. The rungs looked sturdy but slick with moisture. Jessica retrieved a coil of rope from her coat pocket, an old habit from sailing trips, and tied one end around her waist. She handed the other end loosely to the stone ledge above and began her descent, each creak of the ladder echoing ominously. At the bottom, her flashlight revealed a low-ceilinged corridor of bare brick. Damp dripped from the mortar joints, and her breath puffed in pale clouds. Boxes stamped, archives, lined one side. The opposite wall bore a heavy wooden door secured by an iron latch. Before approaching, she knelt to inspect the floor. Fresh footprints mirrored those above, deep heel impressions brandishing the same diamond and anchor pattern. Her pulse quickened. Whoever murdered Harriet had returned here. Jessica rose and advanced toward the locked door. She ran her finger along the latch and noticed scuff marks near the edge where a key might turn. She removed Mrs. Harper's brass key, the one Emily had given her, and fitted it into the lock. With a click, the door swung inward on heavy hinges. Inside lay a repository of forgotten treasures, all paintings covered in dust sheets, cracked porcelain urns on pedestals, and dozens of leather-bound volumes lining the walls. The spotlights overhead had been intentionally shut off, leaving her lantern to cast long, flickering shadows. On a central table lay an open portfolio, watercolor sketches of local landmarks, overlaid with penciled annotations and price estimates. A small lockbox sat nearby, its lid ajar. Jessica approached the table and examined the sketches. They bore a curator's precision, every stroke labeled, every border measured. One sketch depicted the library's west archway, annotated, hidden passage behind ivy, secret vault. Beneath it lay a hastily scribbled note, CW must see this, midnight. The same initials as the monogram on the handkerchief. Her breath caught. CW, could it be Captain Wallace, the retired sea captain she'd interviewed? The man had the initials CW and a reputation for guarding his own interests. But why lure Mrs. Harper here, only to kill her? Before she could ponder further, the trapdoor above creaked shut. Jessica spun, flashlight catching the silhouette of a tall figure blocking the narrow entrance. Rain-slicked coat, wide-brimmed hat casting shadow over the face. The figure stepped forward, boot heels echoing in the chamber, and Jessica realized that whatever motives lay hidden in these footprints, she was not alone in seeking the truth. Chapter 6, Confessions in the Chapel. A single lantern swung from the chapel's porch beam, its flame dancing against peeling white paint and casting long, trembling shadows across the weathered steps. Jessica Fletcher paused at the threshold of St. Agnes Chapel. The narrow wooden door cracked open to admit a swirl of candlelight and the faint echo of her own footsteps. Inside, the scent of beeswax and old hymnals mingled with the chill of the stone floor, and overhead, the rafters groaned softly, as if recalling centuries of whispered prayers and somber secrets. Pastor Elijah Morgan knelt before the altar, his broad shoulders bowed under the weight of confession. The simple oak pews behind him were empty save for Jessica. She had slipped in quietly, determined to speak with the man whose sermons had hinted at a scandal too sharp to voice from the pulpit. As she cleared her throat, Morgan straightened, his calm blue eyes reflecting both relief and dread. "Jessica," he murmured, rising. His cassock rustled as he moved toward her. "I expected someone else." "I'm here for the truth," Jessica said softly, stepping past the first pew. "You told me you warned Mrs. Harper, warned her about something she discovered. I need to know what that was." Morgan's gaze drifted upward to the stained glass window depicting St. Agnes holding a lamb. Though the glass glowed in muted jewel tones, his face looked pale and weary. He sank onto the front pew, gesturing for Jessica to join him. "I hesitated to bring this to light," he began, voice low. "But Harriet was like a sister to me. I couldn't bear the thought of her taking that secret, alone, into the grave." Jessica sat beside him, notebook open but untouched. All at once, the chapel's hush felt charged. "Begin where you must," she prompted. He closed his eyes. "It started nearly 20 years ago," he said. "When I first arrived in Cabot Cove, Harriet uncovered a rumor, an art theft dating back to the 1950s. A local benefactor's priceless painting had vanished from the library's collection the night Governor Cabot's centennial gala ended. Officially, it was declared lost to damp and time, but Harriet believed otherwise." Jessica felt her pulse quicken. She leaned forward. What convinced her it wasn't mere deterioration? Morgan sighed. She found a ledger entry, buried in the archives, recording a late-night removal of the canvas. The librarian at the time had noted a secret shipment scheduled after the gala. That note was the key to everything. He opened a drawer in the pew and withdrew a small, leather-bound notebook. The cover bore the initials HH in gold leaf. Jessica recognized Harriet's precise handwriting as she flipped to a page dated June 12, 2005. Found mention of painting's removal. Must confront Reverend Hale. Morgan's shoulders tensed. Reverend Samuel Hale, he continued, was my predecessor. A man of impeccable reputation, and the only person with keys to both the chapel storeroom and the library's vault. Harriet confronted him. He denied everything, but afterwards he left Cabot Cove abruptly, taking the painting with him, or so we feared. Jessica studied the notebook's margins, where Harriet had sketched a crude map showing a hidden panel in the chapel's sacristy wall. Morgan stood and led the way, pulling aside the crimson velvet drape behind the altar. There, in the low north corner, the old plaster bore hairline cracks. Gently, he pressed at a loose stone, and a narrow recess slid open to reveal a small compartment, empty now save for dust and cobwebs. "This is where she went that night," he said, voice catching. "She thought it would still be here. Instead, she found a scrap of burlap and a ledger, Samuel's personal journal, detailing sale of the painting to a collector in Boston. Harriet planned to expose him, return the painting, and clear the library's name." Jessica peered into the compartment, imagining Harriet's hopeful face turning to horror when the painting was gone. "What happened next?" she asked. Morgan closed the panel and drew a steadying breath. "I begged her not to pursue it alone. I feared she was in danger, so I urged her to wait until I could help. She refused. She said justice couldn't wait. That night, she went to the West Wing archway. I followed, but I never reached her in time." Jessica's heart clenched. "You followed her?" He knelt again, fishing a brass key from his pocket. "This unlocks the carriage house trapdoor," he whispered. "I brought it here, intending to meet her in secret. She never arrived, and I returned here in fear, only to discover she'd been lured elsewhere. I searched in vain, then spent hours trying to piece together her plans. I carry her notebook to remind myself what I failed to prevent." Jessica accepted the key, weighing it in her palm. "So someone else knew of this compartment, and the painting's location," she said. "And they wanted to stop Harriet from talking." Morgan nodded, tears welling. "The initials CW on the handkerchief, that points to Captain Wallace. He had means to transport contraband, ships, sailors. He might have been the middleman. His eyes met Jessica's. "I never imagined anyone here in Cabot Cove would kill to keep this secret buried." But Harriet was too close to the truth. Silence settled as the congregation of wooden pews stood witness to his confession. Jessica closed her notebook and rose, extending her hand. "Thank you, Elijah. Your honesty may yet bring Harriet's killer to justice." He grasped her hand gratefully. "God bless you, Jessica Fletcher," he said. "I pray you find the rest of the answers, and bring peace to her memory." Stepping back into the moonlit courtyard, Jessica felt the weight of his revelation settle around her like the chapel's ancient stones. The stolen painting, the hidden complicit, the shattered trust, every confession edged her closer to unmasking the murderer. In the hush of the night, she resolved to follow this lead straight to the docks, where Captain Wallace waited in the shadows, and where secrets festered like barnacles on a ship's hull. Chapter 7: The Captain's Secret. The moon hung low over the harbor, its silver glow fractured by the rippling water as Jessica Fletcher made her way along the creaking wooden planks of Cabot Cove's old pier. Salt spray misted her face and jacket, and the steady thrum of sluicing waves against pilings provided a restless soundtrack to her thoughts. She carried the brass key Pastor Morgan had given her and the ink-stained handkerchief monogrammed CW in a small evidence bag. Somewhere among these bobbing vessels awaited Captain Calvin Wallace, the retired sea captain whose initials and penchant for smuggling had placed him at the center of this deadly mystery. Jessica paused beneath a single lantern suspended from a curved iron arm. The light illuminated a half-lit skiff tied to a cleat nearby, its paint peeling, the name, Sea Wanderer, still faintly visible on the stern. Beyond, masts and boathouses receded into darkness. She recalled the handkerchief's coarse cotton, too utilitarian for a well-heeled gentleman, yet embroidered with the very initials he shared. Had the captain confronted Harriet Harper here, at midnight, offering her proof of his own clandestine dealings? And had that proof become a motive for murder? Footsteps echoed behind her. Jessica turned to see a tall figure emerging from the gloom, Captain Wallace, his broad shoulders draped in a dark raincoat, his hands gripping a length of rope. Salt white hair peeked from beneath a weather-beaten cap, and his hawk-like profile was set in a grim expression. At the sight of Jessica, his eyes narrowed. "Miss Fletcher," he said, voice low and gravelly, "I wondered when you'd come calling." "Good evening, Captain Wallace," Jessica replied, stepping forward. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "I'm following evidence that leads me here." She held up the handkerchief, "to you." Wallace's jaw tightened. He brushed past her to the skiff, lifting the lantern from its post and setting it on the dock to illuminate the boat's interior. Inside lay a canvas torp, a wooden box, and a rolled-up chart tied with twine. He unfastened the torp, revealing a small iron trap box, the same size and shape as the one Jessica had glimpsed in the secret vault beneath the carriage house. Its lid was sealed with a simple clasp. "Careful now," he warned, stepping between her and the box. "That belongs to me." Jessica's gaze drifted to the chart. Its edges were water-stained, the paper brittle. "May I?" she asked, nodding to the rolled parchment. Wallace hesitated, then released the chart. Jessica unwrapped it, revealing a meticulous nautical map annotated, secret mineshafts and contraband routes, 1950 to 1970. Beneath the title, a bold X marked a canoe landing behind the chapel, a clear link to Pastor Morgan's confession about Reverend Hale's secret compartment. "This explains your involvement," Jessica said, voice measured. "You inherited knowledge of these old smuggling routes, but Harriet planned to publish them. That would have exposed you, your associates, and the truth behind the stolen painting." He crossed his arms. "You're not wrong. Harriet discovered things I thought buried forever. But I didn't kill her. I only came here to retrieve my grandfather's journal, the one you carry. He was involved in the heist decades ago. I intended to negotiate with her, to keep our families out of disgrace. Jessica studied his lined face in the lantern's glow. You confronted her here at midnight, didn't you? You wanted to hide the evidence before she could contact the authorities. She held up the brass key. This key opens the trapdoor here, but you also had access to the chapel's secret panel. And the ledger, marked Harper Heirlooms, contained your records. Wallace's shoulders slumped. I had no choice. My reputation, my livelihood, everything I am rests on those old secrets. Harriet had every right to reveal them. She was a great friend. But once she threatened exposure, I panicked. Jessica's pen hovered over her notebook. What happened after you met her? He closed his eyes, voice thick with regret. We argued across the deck of my old sloop, tied up at the docks. I begged her to reconsider, but she refused. Then I blacked out. He shook his head. I awoke hours later to an empty skiff, the trap box gone, and Harriet's journal missing too. When I returned to the library the next morning, I heard she'd been found dead. Her breath caught. So you don't know who killed her? Wallace's eyes glistened. I swear, Miss Fletcher, I left her alive. Jessica nodded, weighing his words. Your confession helps explain the tangled web of secrets, but it doesn't clear you entirely. The murderer might have used your panic as cover. They knew you'd be here. He exhaled sharply. Who else knew of my maps? Besides Pastor Morgan and Reverend Hale, it could only be one person. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Emily Harper. She had access to her aunt's files and knew about your ledger. She might have feared being implicated in an illicit network. Wallace shook his head. Emily was too timid to kill. She'd sooner sacrifice herself than harm her aunt. Jessica pocketed the chart and key. Perhaps, but fear makes unexpected monsters. Thank you, Captain. You've given me more than anyone else. He nodded wearily. I'll assist in any way I can. Harriet deserves that much. As she turned to leave, Jessica revisited the skiff. The trap box remained, corners dented, clasp intact. A final clue, the interior bore a smudge of dark residue, ink mixed with a hint of rust. She carefully unlatched it, revealing a folded letter in Harriet's handwriting. To Emily, if I fall, trust no one. Clutching the letter, Jessica realized there was one path left to follow, the niece who knew too much. With renewed determination, she braced herself against the night breeze and set off toward Emily's cottage, certain that the final truth lay waiting there. Chapter 8. The Denouement. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the tall windows of the Cabot Cove Library's reading room, igniting motes of dust in the warm air. Jessica Fletcher stood before the gathered suspects, Mayor Owen Alden, Captain Calvin Wallace, Pastor Elijah Morgan, and Emily Harper, each seated in an alderwood chair arranged in a semicircle. On a small table between them lay the recovered journal, the brass key, the ink-stained handkerchief, and a battered leather portfolio. The hush in the room felt charged, as if the very walls awaited Jessica's final revelation. Jessica began softly. Mrs. Harper's death was no random act. It stemmed from a secret she alone uncovered, and one suspect tried desperately to conceal. She tapped the journal. Within these pages, she documented not only the ledger entry of the 1950s art theft but also sketched a hidden panel in the chapel and a vault door beneath this library. She believed the stolen painting still lay concealed. She held up the torn map fragment. Emily, You showed me this piece torn from your aunt's desk drawer. You argued with her over heirlooms. You knew she planned to exhume that painting." Emily's cheeks flushed. She glanced at the portfolio. Jessica lifted its cover to reveal the canvas, a centuries-old gilded frame bearing empty canvas. "Here is what you sought," Jessica said, voice steady. "When Harriet discovered the painting, she intended to return it to the town and auction it for the library's endowment. You wanted it sold privately, far more lucrative. So you lured her to the vault beneath the carriage house, attacked her in the darkness, then fled with the painting under the guise of Captain Wallace's midnight rendezvous." Captain Wallace's eyes widened. "Miss Fletcher," he started, but Jessica raised a hand. "Your monogrammed handkerchief, CW, was planted there to implicate him. But under magnification, the tread pattern on the footprints matches the rubber soles of Emily's boots. She wore them that night when she visited the docks, not you." She turned to Pastor Morgan. "And the chaplain's confession about the secret compartment drew us here, but you never killed Harriet." Morgan shook his head, relief mingled with grief in his eyes. Jessica faced Emily, who clutched the edge of her chair. "You knew the brass key would open both the chapel panel and the carriage house trapdoor. You used it to slip into the vault after hours. That ledger you stole, Harriet's notebook, contained the only record of the painting's hiding place. And the letter found in Wallace's trap box, to Emily, 'If I fall, trust no one,' was meant as a warning, not a threat." Her voice softened. "Harriet trusted you more than anyone. She feared you might be tempted by greed." Emily's eyes brimmed. She rose, trembling. "It was supposed to be mine," she whispered. "I thought, if I sold it quietly, I could donate enough to finish the library renovation and still have something left. But when she discovered me, she begged me to give it back. I panicked." Her voice broke. "I never meant to kill her." She sank back into the chair, shoulders heaving. Mayor Alden stood, his face grave. "Emily, you have to turn yourself in." He glanced at Captain Wallace, who nodded stiffly, and Pastor Morgan, whose clasped hands trembled. "Harriet's legacy deserves justice." Emily closed her eyes. "I'll go with you," she said, voice small. "I'm so sorry." She handed the battered frame to Jessica, who carefully transferred it to the table. Mayor Alden retrieved his phone. "I'll call the sheriff now." He turned away, composing himself. Jessica took a moment to gather the scattered clues, the smudged ink arrow pointing to archway, the midnight footprint trail, the handkerchief's embroidered initials, the misplaced ledger in the secret vault, the torn map, and finally, the damning confession. Each piece had fit like a puzzle, revealing not only a murder but a decades-old betrayal of Cabot Cove itself. She watched as Emily was quietly escorted from the room and taken to await the sheriff. In the sudden release of tension, light filtered through the stained glass windows with renewed warmth. Jessica moved to the table, closing the portfolio over the empty frame. Captain Wallace bent to retrieve the original watercolor sketches from his boat, intending to restore them to the archives. Pastor Morgan lingered by the chapel door, already planning a service to honor Harriet's memory. Mayor Alden approached Jessica, his tie loosened and cheeks flushed. "I can't thank you enough," he said quietly. "You've saved this town from losing its soul." Jessica gave a small, wry smile. Harriet would have wanted the truth on display, no matter how painful. She glanced at the journal. The library will reopen again, this time without secrets buried in its walls. As the suspects drifted away, each carrying their own weight of guilt or relief, Jessica lingered in the reading room's hushed quiet. She ran her fingers along the oak table and closed her eyes, picturing Mrs. Harper's gentle face. A single sunbeam broke through the window, illuminating the now empty alcove where the stolen painting had rested. Justice had been served, at last, but the silent shelves would forever hold the memory of secrets revealed and lives irrevocably changed. In that moment, Cabot Cove felt whole again, its mysteries laid bare under autumn skies, its community's trust restored by the quiet determination of its greatest amateur sleuth. And Jessica Fletcher, her work done, slipped out into the lingering dusk, ready, as always, to pen the next chapter in a tale of shadows lifted and truths uncovered.